Welcome to the Prepped and Polished podcast, the podcast that empowers you to take control of your education, featuring weekly interviews with influencers in the world of education, as well as tutoring tips, lessons, and updates. And now, here's your host, Alexis Avila.
And welcome back to another episode of the Prepped and Polished podcast. This is episode 172. Alexis Avila, I'm your host, and you can find us on your social media channels, Facebooks, SoundClouds, Twitters. Just type Prepped and Polished and you'll find us, and we'll engage there. And if you're interested in tutoring or test prep, you can always call me, 781-753-9951. Have a question or reaction during or after this podcast? Submit your question to radio@preppedandpolished.com. Let's get to today's guest. Today on episode 172, I speak to dyslexic researcher and an expert, Elisheva Schwartz. She's a dyslexic researcher, scientist, podcast host, mother. And she's on a mission to decode the dyslexic mind and empower the dyslexic community to fully understand both the strengths and the difficulties of the processing style. Elisheva was struggled in school at times, especially with her dyslexia. So she, used her passion, her struggles to help empower today's youth. So eventually, Elisheva did find her way to university. She studied psychology, cognitive science, and education. And today, she is flourishing, and she is a podcast host with a very huge, successfully educational podcast called the Dyslexia Quest podcast. It's on iTunes. Check it out. And she's also offering a free webinar on the 7th, 14th, and 21st of August 2017. If this podcast airs after that, you can definitely access her webinar and engage with her there. And I'm going to put some links on the show notes. But we're going to talk to Elisheva today about her struggles as a school kid with dyslexia and how she used her experiences to empower students with dyslexia and learning disabilities. Elisheva, welcome to the Prepped and Polished podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing really well. I'm super psyched to be here and to take part of what you built. As somebody who has done a podcast, I get what it takes to put this together and put out this information out there. And I've been so impressed by the amazing work that you've been doing. I've been poking around your show and just enjoying it and feeling nourished by all the support that you put out there. So thanks for doing what you're doing.
Thank you. So start off by sharing a little bit about your background and how you ultimately became, kind of this authority, passionate researcher on dyslexia.
Sure. So I had a very difficult time throughout the school system. By the time I was in third grade, my teachers were telling me, hey, we're telling my parents, hey, there's something that's really going on with Elisheva. She's not keeping track like the other students in the school. When I was in kindergarten, when I was in Q&A, I really excelled. My parents would go to parent-teacher conversations, and they would say, we love your daughter. She's so inquisitive. She asks such interesting questions. She loves story time. She's so creative. We love the art project she's doing. And then when I got to first grade, things started getting difficult, but they kind of pushed me along. Second grade was tough. By the time I get to third grade, they said, look, you have to get her evaluated. There's definitely something that's going on over there. And so I got evaluated with just general learning disability, which we didn't really know what to do with. And with that information, I was sent to resource room classes where I would get into the resource room class and instead of the homeroom class where there was a little bit more information and things were going a little faster, things were going slower. There was a lot of chaos. There was a lot of boys, crumpling up papers and making spitballs and throwing them around. And a lot of chaos. And so the resource room didn't really feel like it was supporting my learning difference. It just kind of felt like babysitting because we couldn't keep up in specific subjects like reading or math. And so all my frustration that I was having in school started spilling into disciplinary issues. And I started getting sent out of class. I have a very clear memory of being with this little third grader in the hallway. I was so terrified. I was in this big school and sent out into the hallway. because all this frustration that I was having that I wasn't doing well in school I started acting out. And by 5th grade, I was asked to stay home for 3 days at a time for having conflict with the school and the administration. And ultimately, by the time I was a junior in high school, when all the pressure of getting into a good college and all the pressure of getting good SAT grades and APs and all the pressure of now you are going to be presenting yourself to get into a good college and see where you land just became too much. And one day I woke up and I told my mom I can't face another day of school. After being hopeful and trying so hard from 1st grade all the way to junior year, trying, tomorrow I'm going to do better. In the beginning of the next semester, I'm going to give it my all and really prove to them. I just felt like it was an insurmountable task to really prove my worth or prove my competence. And I just felt like I couldn't face another day. My body literally shut down. I got exhausted. I must have slept for about 2 months straight. Like I woke up for food and I was so run down. Ultimately, I stayed out of the school system for about half a year, and my parents got a doctor's note that said mono, but really it was just like I was at the end of my rope. Whatever it was that had me be motivated to show up another day and try to tackle the system wasn't there anymore. I was burnt out, and then the school said, if she doesn't come back tomorrow, we're kicking her out. And then I came back and I finished. But that was a really big turning point for me, because at that point I realized that doing what I was doing before of just trying to muscle through it and just trying to be more ambitious or more disciplined than before wasn't going to work. And I became really curious about what does it mean to learn the way that I learned. And what does it mean to somebody that had a learning disability, which ultimately led me down a long journey of really understanding it as a learning difference. But essentially I went on to college. I studied cognitive science, really animated by this question of what does it mean to be who we are? What are the individual differences in learning, and how do those individual differences reflect both strengths and weaknesses? But when I was in school, I felt like I was so curious about these questions, but they weren't really being addressed. The way that the school would talk about topics like learning disabilities seemed very much from a deficit-oriented perspective, which didn't really relate to my abilities, because what was so confusing is I felt like I had all these strengths and all these abilities, and at the same time, I felt like there were specific tasks that were very difficult for me to do. So the way that learning disabilities were talked about didn't really jive with my personal experience, and I used to raise my hand in class. And when the teacher would be talking about, a 2nd grader or 3rd grader that might be having a bit difficult time with reading and might be behind this way or that way, and I used to raise my hand. I used to say, "That's me. I was just like that." And there would be this look of shock, on my classmates that is somebody that had a learning disability or learning difference. People couldn't put the two together, because when they saw me, they saw somebody that was engaged in the classes, was super interested in what was going on, was motivated and ambitious and articulate, and to them, that's not what a learning disability looked like. So that helped me notice that there's like a really important conversation that needs to be had and explored around learning differences and individual differences. And ultimately, to skip ahead a couple years in the story, I started a blog to explore a lot of the unanswered questions that I had around dyslexia and learning differences and ADHD and the strengths that have there was a lot of mythology around the strengths around this thinking style, and I wanted to actually call anybody who has ever done a study and been involved in research and meet them or fly to them or get on Skype with them and say, what is the actual neuroscience background? Coming from a scientific background, I said, I want to know what is the actual research on this, because there's a lot of mythology around it, but what is actually scientifically based? And so that began my blog, which evolved into a consultancy, and that evolved into online courses that I do. But that's the basic spiel.
Wow, you can tell you're just passionate about it, which is key. What is dyslexia, and how has the definition changed over the years, evolved over the years? In your
That is such a good question. Most people, when they think dyslexia, they think letter reversals. And despite being dyslexic my whole life, that's what I used to think. And I thought I wasn't dyslexic because I thought, I don't really see things backwards. The numbers don't move around on the page. And I always wonder how that became such a popular misconception. Like, did that misconception get a PR agent to go around and associate, letters being seen backwards with dyslexia? Because it's completely inaccurate. That's not what dyslexia is. Dyslexia is, and it's a little hard to define it because there's some opposing viewpoints, but basically it's when an individual has a difficult time with spelling, reading, organization, and some of those rote tasks that you need in early elementary school, and then it manifests throughout your whole life. But despite high levels of intelligence, ability, and opportunity. So basically this manifests whenever, parents that are listening to this, very often they'll notice that, they have two children. One child gets to school and they get to first grade, second grade, third grade when they need to learn all these fundamentals of learning. So they need to learn, the keys of decoding and reading and basic math facts, and they get it really quickly. And then they have another child that is so intelligent and so thoughtful and so creative at home, and they get into the classroom and the teachers are saying they just can't pick this up. And it's shocking for the parents because they've never encountered their child that way. They've never encountered their child struggling, and then they get into this particular environment and they're not flourishing. And this question has captivated researchers for over 100 years. And teachers are so interested in this question. Why is it that some kids are getting it and some kids aren't getting it? And it has nothing to do with intelligence. And actually, one of the first ever medical reference to dyslexia was, I think it was in the 1800s, where a doctor wrote, this lad was said to be the smartest boy in the class if only he could keep up with his readings. So it was always this tension that teachers couldn't figure out. Like, there was so much potential, and yet they couldn't really master these school-related skills. And the reason why I say that it's hard to define it is because later, as the research went on, they've noticed that spelling or reading doesn't come out in a vacuum. So your ability to spell or ability to read, there's no part of the brain that is like, this is for spelling, this is for reading, this is for math, this is for English. Really, when you're using math, you're using underlying cognitive processes. So you're using working memory, you are using, abstract reasoning, and those skills might show up in math, they might show up in English, they'll show up all across the board. So really what you're looking at is a difference in those mechanisms. So you see a difference in executive processing, you'll see a difference in working memory. So it's these kind of underlying differences that will poke their head up, in reading. They'll poke their head up sometimes in math class. They'll poke their head up sometimes with handwriting, with organization. But on the other side of the coin, it also comes with significant strengths. And I've talked to several of the researchers that have really been on the cutting edge talking about that this is a way of processing information that comes with both strengths and weaknesses. Although in the traditional school system, you might have a difficult time getting through it.
Amazing. And tell us about what services you provide for students and families.
Sure. So the big thing, I consult in all different ways. I work with families and I consult with school districts, but the main thing that I'm very focused on is I have a weekly show, very similar to this, which is all about dyslexia. We talk to individuals involved in research, but also just individuals that are involved in really interesting advocacy and education. So for example, last week we just published Dyslexia and Math, which was ways that you could, help your dyslexic child really flourish with math. So that's an example of something we do. So that comes out weekly. And the other main focus, and it kind of feels like I've had two children, but this feels like my third little baby, is I'm now doing this 6-week online course for parents that have dyslexic children. And you can have a dyslexia diagnosis or just a parent that feels like they have a child that has dyslexic type thinking style. And it's all about how can you support the social emotional ramifications of a child not thriving and doing well in school. So it's all about building their self-esteem and inner resilience. And I came up with the idea to do this program because in the whole learning disability, learning differences space, I saw that there was starting to slowly be more and more emphasis on how we can change education, how we can change instruction. Here are the tactical tools that we can do to help learning be more tailored for their processing style. But then at the same time, I saw that there were lots of families that felt really disempowered because they said, look, either I have a teacher that's not cooperating or I have a school that's not cooperating. I can't take my child out and homeschool them. I can't put them in the private school. I feel like there's nothing I can do to help my child. And I see my child is suffering, and I see my child has, ramifications of anxiety and tantrums and is acting oppositional because they're not flourishing in school. And what I realize is there's a whole nother side of the conversation. So yes, we need to be making schools more inclusive and more supportive for individuals that learn differently. But at the same time, there are so many things we can do in our parenting to empower our children to build a really strong inner sense of resilience and a really strong inner sense of self-esteem so that they're more resilient in the face of difficult situations. And that will really stand the test of time if they get to a college and, for whatever reason they have professors that are not understanding, or for whatever reason they're in a job that isn't fully supportive, that they'll know how to deal with those difficult times and navigate them so that they become even more empowered through the experience, and they feel like they can glean all the lessons from the experience and become stronger from it. And that's not to say that it's not very important to support dyslexics as well in terms of changing instruction and in terms of giving specific accommodations, but I think the two go very nicely in tandem. It's the only course that delivers this kind of exploration on parenting, on self-development from a background of understanding the cognitive neuroscience of what does it mean to be a dyslexic thinker. So one of the 6 weeks is we go into how do you fully understand what it means to have a dyslexic processing style so that when you understand your own experience and you understand your child's experience, you can properly support them.
Nice. And this rolls out in August, right?
So I don't know when you're putting this out, but we have 2 free workshops that I'm doing. It's an hour-long free workshop anybody can join. We're exploring a lot of these ideas. So one is Monday the 14th and one is Monday the 21st, and that's free and anybody can join. And then starting September 7th, that's when the actual 6-week course is going to be going on. So if anybody's curious about this kind of thing, but they're not sure and they want to get to meet me and come on a live workshop, those are free workshops. I don't know when this is going to be out, but maybe by the 21st, this one will be out.
Yeah, it will be. And this is 2017, and all this information will be in the show notes.
Perfect.
So tell us, what are just a few key strategies, tips you have for students who suffer with dyslexia? I mean, I don't want to say suffer; it's a little too extreme of a word, but struggle with it and want to I think it's complicated because you don't have to suffer with dyslexia, right?
But very often individuals with dyslexia do suffer if they're unaware of how to support their learning styles, or if they're in an environment that's very not supportive for their strengths.
Absolutely.
So
what are some strategies you have who are just struggling? Just some general.
So just give me an age range. Just give me
so high school. High school. Yeah.
So
high school,
that's
junior.
That's a great age. So if you're a high school student and you feel like you might have this kind of dyslexic type processing style where maybe you love to read, but you've noticed that whenever you read, you like to, read the chapter titles, read the beginning of the book, skim paragraphs, and then read the end of the book, and you love and enjoy reading like that. But then when you have to read from a textbook for school, all of a sudden you notice that you missed half of the important details, and when you get a quiz on that, you're like, I never noticed that. But when you're reading sci-fi novels, that's fine because you're so good at content, and you pick it all up. And then when you have to read the textbook, it doesn't work that way. So if you think you're that kind of thinker, I always tell high school students that YouTube is probably one of the most underutilized studying tools. And that is, if you're studying whatever you're studying, if you're studying science or if you're studying history, and the teacher says, go home and read this chapter in the textbook, I always suggest that students look at the chapter headings. What's this chapter about? And then they take either it's a specific war that they're learning about in history, or they'll take a specific term that they're learning about in science and put it in YouTube, because there are amazing multimedia study aids on YouTube where students are creating their own, or really talented media people like you that are putting resources out into the internet to help students study. There are so many videos on so many things. So if you're learning about mitosis in biology, and once you get to hear about the concept on YouTube and you get to see visual representations, then if you want to go back into the textbook, all of a sudden you'll have a context to build on, and you'll be able to know where to put those words that you're reading. Because when you're talking about dyslexic thinkers, you're talking about an extreme skill in terms of getting big picture and overarching narrative. So you never want to start studying without building a big picture in your brain as much as possible. So YouTube if you hear something and you see the video, all of a sudden now you have the context. So if you are learning about something in history and you're reading something happened in the 1700s, and it's hard for you to visualize, what did the 1700s even look like? And then you go on YouTube and you type in something, and maybe you see a clip, or maybe you see somebody has a lecture and there's a picture, picture slides that are from the 1700s, or maybe you take out a documentary. Then all of a sudden you have this really rich context that you can start placing the information into. So I think that one tip can radically transform studying. Another thing that I can't emphasize enough is audiobooks. Audiobooks will completely change your relationship to reading. Any mandatory reading that you have to do in school, you are doing a tremendous disservice if you don't listen to it on audiobooks. But now, so I used to tell people to do audiobooks, and it used to be very different. Even 6 or 7 years ago. Now that there are smartphones, and we're also used to, while we're on our phone and listening to an audiobook, we're on Instagram and we're on Facebook. So a tool that used to be really helpful, like if I would have talked to that exact same person 15 years ago, they might have gotten the entire book from audiobook and retained the information and been able to spit it back. And now they're listening to it on audiobook, and they're on Instagram, and they're on Facebook, and they're Snapchatting, and they wonder why half the book, zoomed past them and they didn't retain it. So what you have to do is set up an environment for your success. So I always tell people, if you're listening to an audiobook, maybe go for a walk. Maybe go for a 1.5 mile walk so you have a good amount of time so you're moving. You put your phone in your backpack and just let the headphone wire go out. You get the phone out of your line of vision and keep your body moving, but something that won't take so much attention away from what you're listening to, so you can just focus on listening to it. Or maybe organize all your drawers, but make sure you're not going back on your phone, and because if you're reading captions, that's going to automatically direct attention from listening to the audiobook. So something to keep your hand busy so you're not going back onto the apps, but that keeps your brain nice and open so you can listen to the information. So it does take a bit of intentionality to set it up for success. And when you're talking about younger students, audiobooks are extremely important as well, and then parents can have a hand of, turning off the Wi-Fi so Wi-Fi or apps are not accessible, or other things that parents can do to help make sure that the child is just focused on the listening.
Amazing tips. Now, I would imagine students with dyslexia or any learning challenge also struggles with self-esteem because they are comparing themselves to their peers who might not be struggling with that. So what are some strategies you have for dyslexic students who feel poorly about themselves?
Yeah, that is a huge issue. And many people don't realize how systematic the reinforcement in school is of who you are in the world. Because from the time you maybe get to first grade, you're getting report cards, and it's on a scale from 1 to 100. So in the adult world, unless you're working for a corporation and you're getting written up in a performance review, it's very rare that you'll get such black and white feedback of how you're doing. Usually the feedback that you're getting from your relationships, from the work that you're doing in the world is complex, and people have mixed feelings. But in school, you're getting this very black and white feedback. This is who you are, and it's very easy to compare yourself to the people on your right and the people on your left. And what other people sometimes don't realize, parents and concerned teachers sometimes don't realize, that it can be extremely damaging to a child's self-esteem. Even if an outsider thinks that the student is doing well, oh, you're getting good grades, 85, that's fine. It's not really about the grade, it's much more about the peer group. So if all your friends only needed to study X amount of time and they're getting 95s, even if your mom and dad say 85, oh, that's a fine grade, you should be proud of that. If you know you have to study double as hard and you're still getting 10 points lower, then that can be very difficult. So it's less about in abstraction, like how well you're doing, and more about how you notice if things are harder for you than the other people around you. So it can be extremely challenging. And the first thing I always tell, if there's anybody, I don't know who I'm talking to, if there's any teens that are listening to this and you think you might be dyslexic, go online. There are so many resources. Like I said, go on YouTube. Start educating yourself about what it means to be a dyslexic thinker, because there are so many strengths and advantages. And it could be, I'm sure that there are parts of your personality and parts of your abilities that you've always enjoyed having that you never knew might be related to the other side of the neurological point of things that are difficult for you. For parents, I think it's very important to really listen to your children. if they're telling you, I really don't like this teacher, or I'm really struggling with this, not to shut the conversation down and say things like, oh yeah, school is hard for everybody, this is going to build character, but to try to really get and be a compassionate space, listen to where they're coming from, and understand more of their reality. Every child is going to be different, but it's going to take a little discovery, a little excavating. You have to be a little bit of a scientist, parent, to enter the child's world and really see what's going on to see how they can best support their child.
That's amazing. Do you have any test prep tips? Teenage student, dyslexia, who might have to take that daunting SAT?
It's been a long time since I did my SAT, but actually my parents got a tutor for me, and it was one of the highlights of my educational experience. I had a very difficult time in school, but getting that SAT tutor was really special because there was somebody just by my side that was able to say, you know what, this is why you were struggling with this math problem. It's not that you don't understand the problem. It's because I noticed you keep, writing the wrong number over here. Just somebody that can see what was going wrong and what was going right. That was extremely helpful for me.
That's
awesome. I would say in terms of test prep, if a dyslexic individual knows that they're going to be using a lot of skills that might be harder for them, it's important to schedule more time than you think you need. So to double the amount of time for studying than you might see your friends doing. And it's also important to notice the cognitive load that it's having, it's important to notice that you're expending all that energy and focused attention. That's going to have an impact on your overall energy. So if you have to do an hour of SAT homework, you really want to think, when am I going to do this, knowing that it's going to be extremely draining, and it will drain from the same iPod battery that all my other energies are coming from. So I'll be tired. It'll just be like a regular tiredness. So I always try to say, can you do it Sunday morning when you're fresh at 10 o'clock, so you have some time to wake up, you have some time to take a shower, eat a nicest breakfast, and your freshest mind. Because if you're leaving to do your big chunk of homework to do, 8 or 10 o'clock at night, after you've been drained from school and from seeing your friends and from eating a long, heavy dinner, then you're really putting yourself at a disadvantage. And it's not an easy situation because schedules are very packed, but something that I would suggest, if it's really a top priority for you to get the studying in, maybe you can wake up, at 6 o'clock, take a shower, and from 6:30 to 7:30 in the morning, just knock out your SAT prep so you don't even need to think about it again. So you're devoting that really fresh mind to doing your SAT homework. So it's always important to think that the tasks that are going to be a little bit more difficult for you, to always make sure you have your freshest brain, you're the most awake, you're the most not tired. And then for some of the things that might come more easily to you, whether it's, watching a documentary for school or listening to a podcast while you're studying for something to get more general context, you can do that later at night.
That's awesome. Your podcast is a top podcast in iTunes under the educational section. Tell us about the Dyslexia Quest podcast.
Sure. So I mentioned it a little earlier. Yeah, we were ranked number 29 in the education category for one hot minute. I don't know what the gods of iTunes were shining down on us. And it's a weekly show, and it's for parents that have either a dyslexic student or a dyslexic child, or a child that, is showing a lot of dyslexic type tendencies. And they're interested in these questions around how can we reimagine education, how can we support our child's emotional needs, how can we support their practical needs. I mean, we explore all sorts of different issues, and I'd love for you guys to join us on my quest. It's really been my quest that has become a community quest.
Nice. And what types of projects are you currently working on?
So like I said, it's really just this 6-week project, this course. I did a cohort earlier this year, and I've been working on this course the entire year. It's my little baby. I've been working on the curriculum. It's a 6-week course, and so that's the big thing. And then the weekly show, that's where all my attention and focus is going. And if anybody feels like it might be something that they're interested in, they're not sure, like I said earlier, they can attend that free workshop with me going on Monday the 14th or Monday the 21st.
And how do we best get in touch with you, Elisheva?
So I'm Elisheva Schwartz. It's Elisheva Schwartz, Schwartz. If you put me in Google, I'm everywhere. We're at the Dyslexia Quest on Instagram. We've got a really nice community going on over there. And Elisheva Schwartz I have my business page on Facebook. Those are probably the easiest ways to find me, and ElishevASchwartz.com.
Any advice for teens who are listening to you today, who are getting ready to cross that bridge from teenager to young adulthood?
For all teens, or for teens with learning disabilities, or because I can answer either or?
How about for teens who are with learning challenges?
For teens teens that are getting ready to go to college, is that what you said?
Yeah, and with dyslexia. Yeah.
So a big thing with dyslexic college students is college is an amazing opportunity for individuals with learning differences. Usually, like the kind of messages that I got when I was going through school, teachers would say when I was in elementary school, they would say, you know what, you better focus now because when you get to middle school, it's going to be much more challenging. And then you get to middle school and they wave their finger at you and they say, when you get to high school, the teachers would not put up with this. It's very challenging. And then you get to high school, they say, you know, you really have to master this now because when you get to college, it's going to be very difficult.
Yep.
But I've noticed for many dyslexic students, college is much, much easier than high school. And there are several reasons for that. One is because you can pick classes based on your interests. So there's a lot more flexibility to pick a class that's based on your learning style and your interests. And especially, we were talking about these dyslexic crossing style, which is so big picture and so conceptual that when you're learning something that you're interested in, there's going to be so much more of that stickiness to overcome working memory and some of the other issues that might come up in class. But also because you can create a calendar that you can have just as heavy as a load that you need. So I always encourage dyslexic students, go for the most interesting classes and go for classes that might even be more demanding than you think you can do, but at the same time, put less on your calendar than you think you want to. So however you want to build your calendar, slice that down by 25%. Give yourself more wiggle room and more white space to do things at your pace, but just make sure that you're challenged and engaged. So the two things you want to think about are what looks most interesting, what's going to be most compelling to me, and now I need to assume that I'm being overly optimistic about how quickly things will take, and to make more white space in your calendar than you think that you need to take things at your own pace.
Amazing tips. Elisheva, thanks for coming on the Prepped and Polished podcast, and appreciate your time.
Awesome.
And this wraps up our show today. This was episode 172 with dyslexia expert Elisheva Schwartz. Check out Elisheva's website, ElishevASchwartz.com. I'm going to spell it for you. It's ElishevASchwartz.com. Check out our next episode, 173, our tutoring tips episode, and to access today's episode 172, as well as all of our podcast episodes, head over to preppedandpolished.com/podcast or to soundcloud.com/preppedandpolished. Thank you for joining us on the Prepped and Polished podcast. Now go out there and take control of your education.